Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Welcome back. I haven't put a video out in a while and I figure now's the time to do it. And I'm in the winter, so it is January 3rd today. The winter has been really cold. I haven't been able to get out on the bike much at all. That kind of pretty much came to a halt. And so I've got a lot of time indoors. So I'm going to be doing a lot more work, book reviews, videos. I'm also trying to put together the second book of mine. But in this video, I wanted to give a review, a book review for Two World Wars and Hitler. Who was responsible? Anglo-American Money, Foreign Agents, and Geopolitics by Dr. Jim MacGregor and Dr. John O'Dowd. Yes, on the back there you can see them. Well, and they are both it's a doctor, a retired medical practitioner, and a retired Scottish scientist. And they put some really amazing work together. This book was absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, first of all, because it was such good research, and second of all, because it just completely changes the established narrative, you know, backed up with evidence, and shows you some of the really slimy things that occurred that resulted in the world wars, World War I and World War II, and especially the fault of the British Empire. I mean, the average person, you know, typically thinks that it was all Germany, that the Germans were just barbarians and wanted wars. And when you read this book, it shows you that nothing could be further from the truth. Now, in the Second World War, it was more like they picked. So, in the First World War, who was it? In the First World War, Germany really tried to avert a war, and what happened was, like, cables were being, like, sabotaged, and, like, just all the attempts at peace were being sabotaged because Britain actually wanted the war. And then they actually would send Germany food in order to keep them fighting. Like, so they were in such a bad position in World War I that the war probably wouldn't have continued if Britain wasn't sending them food through this back channel in order to let them keep fighting. It's crazy. But I mean, you can read the book. It's all in here. And in the Second World War, they actually groomed Hitler into power with the help of Western intelligence, with the help of a man named Putzi Humpfstangl. And the whole idea was, and this is the reason why they were doing it, they saw Germany and Russia as a threat to their world supremacy. They wanted to dominate the globe because they think that the British are the finest race of human beings the world has ever seen. And that was, you know, and they talked about some of the early people like John Ruskin, who was echoing that sentiment and got all of these other British, especially the British that formed a secret society called the Society of the Elect, or the Milner Group. And so early on, and the book goes into John Ruskin, and then a lot of this book is building off the work of Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley, he wrote The Anglo-American Establishment. Hey, there he is right there. And he wrote this massive book called Tragedy and Hope, a history of the world in our time. It's like 1,500 pages. And basically trying to show us how the world really works, how the power structure really operates, how the establishment really operates. And I actually got, I got right there, that was my bookmark. I haven't finished it yet. I think I'm going to go through this again and actually read it all the way through. But so these two books, this guy was a Georgetown professor, and actually Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, actually had him as a professor. And so this guy was not just like some crazy conspiracy theorist, even though they try to paint him as such. He was a well-respected professor, and he actually had inside information from the Milner Group. And that's why he wrote this, actually, and this wasn't published until his death. He didn't want this published until after his death because he knew that it would cause him real problems. So it was published after his death. I've read this. And it talks about a powerful secret society that was created after the days of John Ruskin, and their whole goal was to dominate the globe. And they saw Germany and Russia as a threat, because if Germany and Russia teamed up, then they could probably overcome the domination of Britain in the world scene. They thought that they were such a threat, they had to destroy Germany. And so they started to plan 2 world wars in which they could do that, in which they could totally crush Germany, and Germany would no longer be a threat to the British Empire. Now, mind you, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was leading Germany in the days of World War I, was actually a relative of the King of England, as well as a relative of Tsar Nicholas, who was in charge of Russia. And it's just crazy to see these power struggles with people that are family, that should otherwise be on good terms with each other, you know? And the sliminess is just out of control. Like, if you read through this, and so this is a pretty big book, right? This is 667 pages. And I started reading it, and it was just so interesting, and it was just like, wow, I can't believe so many things that I never knew about And I mean, I did to some extent because I have read Carol Quigley's work, but to see it put together the way they did it, it was amazing. And it's just like every step of the way, Britain just acting so slimy and, cutthroat and just complete liars. And what they did was they took control of the press and they used that to kind of promote their message, promote the angle that they want people to see. And it just shows how they took total control and they were able to just rise all the way to the top. The society of the elect. And, all the time they're just painting themselves as saviors and demonizing whoever they had as the German Kaiser, make him look like a savage, a barbarian. Now, in the case of Hitler, I mean, he more or less was, but they groomed him into power because they knew he was reckless and he would commit national suicide for Germany. And that's what he did. And they crushed Germany afterwards. And then also, after the Second World War, well, actually, starting in 1917, after the First World War, they started to crush Russia as well. Because if you look at the Soviet Union, was more or less a creation of British intelligence. And I remember there was an excellent book called Russian Hazard, The Adventures of a Secret Service Agent in Russia. And they had all these British intelligence people kind of guiding the Soviet Union along, and actually came out of, I think, was it Marxism, who was an English, German, but an English philosopher. He moved to Britain. So it was all these systems that came out of Britain, and Britain was actively involved in setting up the Soviet Union. I remember actually when I was doing some research for my book and I came across, it was some correspondence, I think somebody who was representing Lord Milner, and he was talking to somebody in Russia. I think it was like I think it was the British embassy in Russia, and he was saying that Lord Milner wants the Bolsheviks in power, implying like they have the power to put whoever they want into power. And yeah, that was an interesting book, but basically they took control of both of them, turned them against each other, and then after the Second World War, Germany's crushed, and then, it'd be another like 40 plus years before the Soviet Union would also be crushed. And so a lot of this stuff in here too echoes what I was saying in my own book, and not to get too deeply into my book, but there was all these dirty tricks that Britain was playing. And I talked about that in the first few chapters of my book, and it kind of lines up with what this book says. And then, when I talk about Soviet Russia, you could just apply the fact that it's British intelligence more or less directing it. So I may make another video about that whole thing, about how we should reevaluate some of what I said in this Sleeper Agent in relation to like the British takeover of Soviet Russia, because they were kind of behind the scenes moving all the pieces, and But it's just amazing how much mind-blowing research these guys did. And just how they lied so bad. The British Empire is like, they are barbarians, but they do it in a way. They do it in such a deceptive, slick manner that they come across smooth criminals. They would be like the smooth criminals. And, I mean, there were instances where certain people that were considered, on the side of peace and were trying to make peace and were trying to keep Britain out of war, because there were good people in Britain. It's just that this small group that gained control of Britain basically they were just very Machiavellian, and they took control, and they basically went after all the people that were in opposition to their agenda. And there was this one guy that it seems that it looks like they poisoned him. And what I said to Jim was, I think it was with belladonna alkaloids. Belladonna alkaloids, that's like the deadly nightshade plant, or like datura, same alkaloids. And it's like a deliriant, so it makes you poison someone with that, it can make you really crazy, and then you wake up, you have no memory of what happened. They brought him over to Russia, or was it France? I forget what his name was. But basically he made a big fool of himself. I think they probably dosed him with that drug, got him to make a big fool of himself, and then more or less neutralized him. But it talks about how this small group gained control of the press. It was a bunch of people at Oxford and also All Souls College. It talks about their relationship with the bankers. This secret society is called the Society of the Elect, and it was started by Cecil John Rhodes, 1853 to 1902. And basically, he was inspired by the work of John Ruskin, and how John Ruskin was saying how the British are the best types of human on Earth, and they should do everything possible to establish world domination, to save everybody else, right? Because they're so awesome, they're so great. They need to take care of you. And they had counterparts in the United States. They had what they called an Eastern establishment. And it was like these same groups began to take hold of America. And, I go, when I was talking in my book about how the British were attacking the United States with smallpox since the days of George Washington, it's kind of like they always maintained themselves as enemies of the United States, but acted as though they were our allies. And they would be the allies of America as long as America was completely under their control. And that's what seems to be the case. But I would suggest to everybody who is questioning the world and how does this world really work? Well, I think you should start with reading Two World Wars and Hitler. Because it really shows you some of the dirty tricks, the tactics that have been in use. I mean, just the slimiest stuff you can imagine. It's all in here. And just going into the nitty-gritty of the details, it's just absolutely eye-opening. And we talked about Aleister Crowley to some degree. Aleister Crowley, the British occultist who appears to have had some involvement with the sinking of the USS Lusitania. And yeah, he quoted from Dr. Richard B. Spence in his book, Aleister Crowley, Secret Agent 666, Aleister Crowley, British Intelligence and the Occult. He quoted one of the same exact paragraphs that I did when I was talking about British involvement in the first few chapters of my book. And it also really points out how much of a scumbag Winston Churchill actually was. I mean, a lot of people think he's like this, he was this great guy, he was this hero, he was, nothing could be further from the truth. He was a scoundrel of the lowest order. And if you read Two World Wars and Hitler, you'll know why. But yeah, I wanted to make this video and encourage everybody to check out this book. I was kind of slow to get into it, and then once I got into it, it was just like, it was amazing. It was amazing. I love reading. Reading is like my favorite thing. Sometimes I fall off, but then I get back into it, and that's what happens. But lately I've been reading consistently, especially since it's so cold out. But I am really glad that I read through this entire book. Really amazing work. Really amazing work. And so and so now I'm going to read also Jim's other book. Jim has another book called Prolonging the Agony, How the Anglo-American Establishment Deliberately Extended World War I by 3.5 years. And that's what I was talking about, how they would keep Germany fed, how they'd keep sending them food and supplies in order to keep fighting. Imagine that. You have to be, imagine to be that low in your moral compass to feed and arm your enemy so that they could keep fighting, so that you can destroy them and your long-term strategic objective. But yeah, I'm going to get into this one. I look forward to this too. But I guess this is selling really well. People are really taking to this book, Two World Wars and Hitler. And I can see why. Like a lot of the people who love history, well, you definitely are going to want to pick this up. Absolutely. Talk about, there's Pootsie Humpstungle. He was an American, and he was like he came up going to Harvard and was basically very friendly with the American elite, or the Eastern establishment, if you will. And he was actually a friend of a lot of these U.S. presidents. What was it? Was it Roosevelt? Or I think it was, Roosevelt. He was a friend of the Roosevelts and I think other presidents. But he was on the inside in the American establishment. And so he goes to Germany in the rise, right before the Nazis came to power, and they were looking for a suitable candidate that they could choose and groom into power, put into power in Germany, because they basically had complete control over them after They destroyed Germany economically and militarily, especially after the Versailles Treaty. And so this guy, Putzi Humpstungel, helped to groom Hitler into power. Basically taught him how to speak. He gave him a lot of pointers on how to be an effective speaker, this and that, and actually wrote a lot of the German, I think it was like, he wrote some of the music that they would use because he was a pianist. He was like, clearly he was American intelligence, working, probably through the Eastern establishment in coordination with the Society of the Elect over in Britain, and they would groom Hitler into power with the long-term strategic objective of destroying Germany, knowing that Hitler would lead them to ruin. And that was the idea. Because if they could take out the threat of Germany and Russia, especially if Germany and Russia teamed up and decided they were done with Britain's dirty tricks, that would be a threat to them. That's the entire rationale behind them wanting to take out Germany and Russia. But yeah, you think you know history until you read another book like this. And you start to see things in a very different light. Especially when it comes to the press. Like, how do you gain control of the population better than through the press? And that was their idea. They basically like infiltrated the press and started to push these propaganda programs in order to facilitate their agenda, their objectives, and keep everybody in a completely different world than how things really were. And we see that today. So I will leave it there, but get yourself a copy of Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible. 5-star book, absolutely. 5-star book. And this is what it's all about. It's about schooling yourself. It's about learning. It's about knowing how this world operates. And with that said, everybody, take care of yourselves, be yourself, build yourself, and I will see you on the other side.